Hey, everyone, and welcome. You are listening to Alumless. Thank you so much for tuning in, and happy Friday to you. It is January the 19th, 2024. I am Ryan Catherwood, and the gentleman sharing the screen with me is Chris Marshall. He is the founder, the CEO of CMAC, and Alumless is a CMAC production. If you have any questions for Chris or myself, or just want to say hello, please do use the comments section of the LinkedIn event. And we can actually see your comments here from our streaming interface. And we'll try to answer your questions during the broadcast. Of course, if you have any questions for our special guest today, JT Forbes from the Indiana University Foundation, we'd be grateful if you'd submit them. But just go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know where you're checking in from. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast edition of Alumless so that you don't miss any of our episodes, and you get to hear the 30-minute bonus segment that we record with each of our guests, which includes our Friday Cheers segment that sometimes we have some really great referrals for you. And at a minimum, we always have a couple of interesting ideas about the types of things we're thinking about. Chris, were you going to say something there? You're on mute, my friend.
Sorry about that. I was going to say sometimes it's highbrow, sometimes it's lowbrow. The Friday Cheers.
Yeah. You never know what you're going to get on the Friday Cheers section, which is a great reason to pick up the podcast edition of the show. Before we get too far down the line, I want to make sure to introduce our fantastic sponsoring partner, Protopia. We as engagement pros are always thinking about how to create more volunteer opportunities. Why is that? Well, the reason is, one of the big ones anyway, is that volunteers give at 2 and even 3 times the rate. At the same time, students throughout their educational journey have questions and could use the advice of alumni. And as alumni leaders, we're asked to figure out ways to make the alumni network available from prospective student to former student and develop partnerships across the campus that will showcase in real terms how valuable the alumni network can be. So, without requiring alumni or students to sign up for another app or platform, Protopia's AI-powered technology activates alumni and turns them into volunteers. Students and alumni seeking advice are connected while removing the administrative burden to the staff. So be sure to check out or visit protopia.co/alumless and let the team there, led by Max Leiston, know that Chris and Ryan sent you. All right. Well, Chris, how you doing today? It was good to see you. We actually caught up in person last week. Time flies by. We were together in Williamsburg with our friends at William and Mary. And, I think one of my favorite parts of what we do is when we get the opportunity to have kind of brainstorming, whiteboard sessions with our partners, where we're kind of laying it all out on the table and having sort of in-depth conversations about where we're headed and what's next, and sort of trying to tackle those critical questions. But what do you think is the key to having a great workshop like that, whether you're involving us or not, of course?
Yeah. It's a great end to that question, is that I do think it's that everyone at the table has equal voice and equal responsibility to listen. And when you get that kind of collaborative spirit in any group, whether it's led by a consultant, facilitated by a consultant or not, the brain meld that happens and the ideas that come out of it are going to be better. So I always have, I try to set some basic ground rules, and those ground rules include things like all voices are equal, no matter who's speaking, we're all listening. So make sure you're doing that. Active listening, athletic listening is a term I use sometimes. And that I also expect everyone to contribute. If you sit back as a passive, participant, and we make some decision, I said, you've agreed to what the group's agreed on because you didn't say anything. And if you had an idea that you think should we go in a different way, you're responsible to speak up and say, no, we should go this direction instead. And so I used to say silence is consent, but that it didn't play well in our world. So, but if you're silent in the context of a meeting like that, and you let something happen, you've consented to the agenda of the full group by not speaking up. So I'll be a little more specific when I say it next, but you know what I'm getting at. So all voices equal, everyone listens, and lean in.
Yeah, well, it was a really great brainstorming session. And I think part of the conversation that we had with our friends at William and Mary is one that lots of university alumni teams, advancement teams are having, which is sort of the relationship between the university and university advancement, the Alumni Association. Sometimes there's a foundation involved as well,
Yep.
right? Kind of in that picture. And there's a relationship there with a couple different organizations. It's fair to say that most universities continue to work on redefining these relationships and create new structures. We're going to bring out JT in just a second, but I wanted to sort of ask you about how would you describe, how the Indiana University Foundation, the Indiana University Alumni Association are thinking about engagement in philanthropy. You're wearing your IU sweater vest there, and you have the IU pennant behind you. For
And I
those of
got
us
this
who are
mug out
listening,
for JT too, so I got it all.
we're really sucking up today. But so what do you have been your observations about IU and perhaps more broadly?
I mean, like many institutions, they're on this journey, and all of us, I think, all schools are on it at some level. And you and I talk about this a lot, Ryan. We call it this integrated advancement model, the continuum from one end of it's all about alumni engagement, and the other end it's all about fundraising. Most alumni programs are somewhere near the middle to the right. Frankly, we're more and more leaning into the fundraising component of it. And JT has led previously an alumni association that was, middle to left, and then has bumped into this more, they're not legally integrated. He'll tell us the story, but they're on the similar journey, like a lot of institutions, thinking about how the two pieces connect together. How often should we think about it being a fundraising outcome versus how often do we think about just being about engagement for engagement's sake? And there's lots of people out there, different opinions on it. I can't wait to hear JT's on it, but I think IU's on a pretty typical path on this. And for a large public, I believe, JT might correct me on this, I believe Penn State is the largest alumni base, a little over 800,000. And I think IU finishes second, around 780,000 alums. And for a large public like this to be having these kind of conversations, I would put them in the cutting edge, bleeding edge category of this work. And look forward to hearing his thoughts on it. Let's bring this guy out.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Let's do it. Hey, JT, how are you?
Good to see you guys.
You too.
Oh, we're so glad you could join us today. JT Forbes is the president and CEO of the Indiana University Foundation. And prior to leading the foundation, JT was CEO of the IU Alumni Association. So really unique perspective you have, JT. We're really glad to have you. So first question is about, you led the IUAA, the Alumni Association, for 12 years. What propelled you to pursue the role of president and CEO of the foundation?
Well, it actually pursued me. I wasn't seeking it. I was asked and called to serve in this role. And as we explored that over, my wife calls it the longest interview ever, 3 years. Your presidential transitions, pandemic, all sorts of stuff. What I came to realize, it was an opportunity not only to serve my alma mater, which is a really special thing, to be in this role for an institution that impacted my life as much as it did, but also it was a chance to take the early education I got in the deeper, historical, philosophical, and professional understanding of the expressions of philanthropy throughout time, but also in modern context. It brought that all into service to be in this role. And I think the pastoral work you do as alumni director, and the community building you do, and the people you meet, and give you a unique insight into how you do this to ensure it maintains its integrity as philanthropy, not just as fundraising, but as really marshaling voluntary action for the public good, for the benefit of the mission and priorities of a very large, complex institution. When Chris talks about that number of alumni at IU, that number is derived from a whole network of campuses throughout the state of Indiana. We even have 4-year medical education programs on non-IU campuses throughout the state. So it's a very large, diverse body of alumni who all go to institutions that aren't all the traditional 200-year-old residential campus. We have a robust urban campus in the capital city. And then we have a network of 4-year baccalaureate and some master's degree programs, campuses throughout the state. And then again, there's medical education centers. So it's a very distributed and diverse enterprise. And I love complexity, and I love jobs where I can learn and grow professionally and personally. And boy, does this give me that opportunity.
It's one of the more complex schools. JT, you and I were one time sort of, who's as complex? And I threw out the University of Toronto and University of Illinois as somewhere in the ballpark of complex as you, but I know now Indiana University is peerless. I've learned that from my time with IU.
We're a case study in complexity. I think it's a rife playground for people who want to do case studies on institutional complexity.
Yeah.
Well, JT,
Sure.
it's now been 3 years since you took over the CEO role at the IUF. And you've been thinking about opportunities for the IUF and IUAA to work together and develop a shared vision for philanthropy at IU. How has that gone? And what have you been thinking about and working towards in that area?
Well, actually, at Indiana University, it's not just about the Alumni Association, because it's its own 501c3 corporation with its own board, as well as the foundation is a 501c3 charitable foundation that also enables the fundraising for the university. But there's a third piece to our Venn diagram, and that is the individuals that work in campus schools and units. And part of this IU complexity is that for years under our budget system, everybody worked in kind of a loose confederation. And we're in the evolution of figuring out how we look at that as an ecosystem, not see three separate kind of pillars of excellence that only work together opportunistically. So we're looking at how do we marshal the full potential of all that talent and all that need and all that opportunity to where we all work in a much more interconnected, interdependent, transparent, collaborative, intentional, measurable way. And that's really been the journey we've been on over the last several years. Because for years, these things all operated, as I said, without that level of a bigger vision of how we all work together for the benefit of IU. Now, that said, that approach has been successful for a long time. It is not sustainable into the future. So we're systematically working through that at the speed of trust and opportunity.
The speed of trust. That is a new.
There's a great line. I want to make sure you've met this person because he used Brian Sisko as your counterpart at NC State. Have you met Brian yet?
I haven't yet.
You two should meet because he uses the phrase, as fast as we can and as slow as we must. It's a great line, though, isn't it?
That is, yes. Yes.
Universities are not known for their swift adoption of change.
Right.
Yeah.
Tectonic pacing. The fastest the pace of trust. I like that line too. So, JT, talk about how your day-to-day, your parking spot and your office have changed, but your day-to-day life and you're coming into work and how you spend your time. How has that changed between 12 years at IUAA and how long has it been at the foundation now?
Oh, I think 3 years.
3.
Yeah. I think I lost count because I just live it day by day. So how's life changed? Well, fundamentally, I think when you're in a job for as long as I was at the Alumni Association, you kind of get into a rhythm. And alumni associations tend to inherently be very event driven.
Right.
And so you kind of get on a routine cycle. And in this job, there is that kind of those. Now that I've been at 3 years, the patterns and rhythms are starting to emerge, but it is more opportunity driven. So it really depends on when a relationship has reached a level of maturity where I need to be involved in that process of taking that relationship from into a conversation about a gift. And those, let's be clear, everybody, we all know that no relationship is linear. So, checking in and stewarding people that have been generous, showing that we did what we said we would do to keep their promises alive and their dreams alive. Because when people make a gift here, they're making a gift, particularly an endowed gift. It's for a dream they want to last forever. So we need to check in on that while they're still living and make sure that we've got transparency in that relationship and we're demonstrating performance and staying in touch. And then sometimes those turn into conversations about doing something else. So a lot of the work is really more one-to-one relationship development and building. Some people we do that with when they visit campus, and others we go see where they are. So it's just a lot more dynamic in that regard. I will say too, the foundation and its business, its operating model, and its financial model give it a lot more resources and flexibility than the Alumni Association has. We were for many years in kind of a traditional membership-driven model, and people don't want to pay for their membership status or alumni status anymore. And some of the ways that universities had financed alumni associations through alternate revenue streams, those things happen here. Those are all altering and changing too.
Yeah.
AI and technology has not just disrupted, the alumni directory, but it's also disrupting the revenue model. And so it's nice to be able to operate strategically with and be able to make investments that really can lead to sustained results, because there's just a lot of hustling for bucks and resources to do things that go on, I think, in a lot of alumni associations. We're, by most measures in terms of endowment and FTE and annual budget, the Alumni Association budget in the university looks larger than most. But when you divide that by the number of alumni, it's a lot more modest than most. Because remember, we're talking about almost 1 billion living alumni, right? So those are some of the ways it's different. I'm also in a unique role now where I'm a part of the president's leadership cabinet. So all these things happening in higher education, I've got a front row seat, and I'm often in the room when we're trying to work through some of these incredibly challenging things that are happening in the society that are washing onto the shores of the universities.
Yeah. Saw that playing out in the last several months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we all know. One of the interesting things I've noted about, especially the larger public institution and alumni associations, is that it's not unusual to find that they spend more time on generate and more resources and disproportionate number of their staff on self-generated revenue so they can keep their operations going versus the time they spend on engaging alumni. And my approach is often to say we need to flip that model and spend more resource and time on engagement. Talk about that a lot.
Yeah. Well, being really intentional and honest about what we can do well, not just what we can do. I mean, a lot of alumni associations, and I use no exception. Tricia and I were talking about this the other day. Tricia Revere Stumpf is now the chief alumni officer. By the way, everybody that's on here that knows her, you all know she's smarter, works harder, and is way more effective in that role than I ever was. And I'm really
That's why we had her on the show before you.
She was on ahead of you, JT. For that exact reason.
As it should be. So I'm sorry. I got so excited about making sure everybody know how awesome she is. I forgot the question. What's the question again?
I think I was talking about how the disproportionate spending on self-generated revenue versus engagement, and you were going to respond to that. It wasn't even a question. It was.
Yeah, I think that's a real thing. I guess the point I want to make is sometimes we get so busy trying to do breadth, be everywhere.
Right.
Tricia and I were talking about this the other day, and we see that as the win. We're everywhere. I think increasingly people that get involved with universities first are a precious gift because it's not something you can just assume is going to happen.
Sure.
But also they're looking for depth. Like, want to be involved meaningfully and showing up at a socially, predominantly social gathering or even a networking experience is not enough for people that want a sustained relationship. And that's one of the big challenges we're facing, because universities and their alumni associations are not community-based charities. And Indiana University is a global university with alumni all over the world. And we tend to look at it sometimes through the lens of the past, where it was much more localized.
Yeah. Yeah.
2/3 of the graduates of the Bloomington campus, the oldest campus, live outside the state of Indiana. So we have to think about our engagement strategies and meet them where they are. And so that's why I just amplify that. That's one of the lessons I learned. And the other one was, don't believe alumni when they tell you what they want the university to do. Because when all of our research over years showed us that when you follow that, they really look at a lot of those things we offer as insurance. They like to know it's there if they need it, but they often think somebody else needs it more than they do.
Right.
Right. So I think you have to really be intentional and clear-headed. and much more honest about what volunteer opportunities you can offer and what the university really needs from its volunteers. And I'm sure glad Tricia is going to figure that out.
Yeah.
So JT, has your opinion on engagement in general changed at all since transitioning to your role at the foundation?
Oh, I'm a liberal arts major and a humanist at heart. So when I took the alumni role, I really believed that we were going to live this utopian, Tocquevillian view of democracy, that the alumni body really was seeking to form an association in order to express its citizenship and participate in the affairs of the university. And when you read the history of these organizations, that's what they were at the beginning, because the university needed them. As I worked in that field longer and longer, and we did more and more research and more listening, I think that's all really evolved. Again, I think alumni are looking for meaningful experiences, and the university tends to default to looking for more donors. And we've got to meet, everybody's got to meet in the middle and understand that all the success universities have had in fundraising, in large measure, is the product of decades-long relationship management. And this kind of production mentality that is an important part of running a development shop has to have within it intentionality to understand part of that production is rooted in developing consistent relationships over time that may have a component of donorship and a steady pattern of transactions of financial commitment, but it also has to be understood at its fundamental level. It's helping sustain somebody's faith in the institute and trust in the institution over time.
Yeah. Speaking of, go ahead, finish.
So to me, I agree. I was at a CAAE meeting, Council of Alumni Association Executives meeting in 2015, where 3 former chief alumni officers from venerable alumni associations came. It was like Stanford, Yale, and Michigan. And the Yale person said, if you want sustainable fundraising, put a chief alumni officer in charge of the development program. And that just stuck with me. And I'm lucky that somehow I find myself in this role in getting uniquely acquainted to the unique challenges that come with following the advice of the former Yale alumni director.
The Mark said that.
Yeah.
Speaking of relationships with IU, we shout out to Maria, Carrie, and Matt who are on. You have a fan club, but we also have someone who added, and for the person who added this, we're seeing it on our feed as LinkedIn users. So if you want to identify yourself, it says, "My wife and I met at IU Bloomington and would love to engage back more meaningfully." So,
and what that typically means is
2 more engagement points out of this for you.
Awesome.
And that typically happens when someone has a more private setting on their LinkedIn profile set up, but we'll be able to see who that is in the LinkedIn event when we check it out for JT to follow up, because there's clearly a relationship opportunity there.
Mm-hmm.
If you could go back in time, JT, the last 3 years, would you do anything differently so far?
It's the classic share question. If I could turn back time. There's a song for everything, everybody. That's one of the things you should learn.
Classic too.
I probably would, but I think you always have to have the willingness to fail forward. So I think the real test is not whether you made a mistake or something didn't work. It's what do you learn from that, either individually in terms of your own performance or organizationally in terms of how do we organize differently. So I don't think, I wouldn't do anything differently, because that wouldn't be the product of all that trial and error and growth and success if I tried to relive that all. So no, I don't think I'd do anything differently.
What do you see as the most significant challenge you're facing with thinking about the foundation and the alumni association working together to reach engagement and fundraising goals? I have one, and it's a scale-related one that I've seen for you guys, but I'm wondering what you would identify as the or one of the greatest challenges that you'll face in that sort of working together integration mode.
I just have culture. Some of the way things are here is the product of relationships between people that go back way long time in history. Because there's a point in the history of institutional advancement at IU where the chief alumni officer and the chief CEO of the foundation were competitive with one another. And it built this culture of separateness and suspicion that we continue to have to transform, because it's just a very deep-rooted thing that, they're the fundraisers and they shouldn't be talking to the fundraisers.
Right.
Or, well, the big bad foundations over here doing this stuff and they have a better resource and have more people and look down at us in the alumni world. And alumni world kind of like, well, I don't know that I want to dance with them.
Go to the dark side and work with the foundation.
Yeah. And it's really kind of funny because now that I'm in this role, I don't come in with that mental model, but I still see it. And I think it's evolving. And Trisha's doing a good job leading the alumni culture in that direction. I'm trying to do what I can over here. And I think one of the best things we did to do that was to take John Feudo's book and use it in a book group with key leaders in both organizations, because that book is really accessible to everybody, and it's really wonderful because it sources all the wisdom of people in a way that amplifies these themes. And I think that's helped us from a staff standpoint. But there's always going to be some past chairs of the Alumni Association or board members of the foundation who are suspicious of a closer alignment because they came up at a time where that system worked for them. And that's fine. In the world we live in today, in the research we did with alumni, they very few, unless you get close to the way IU's organized, differentiate between the foundation and Alumni Association. It's all IU. We're all operating under the private.
If you have 70,000 alumni, 700,000 of them don't know or care about the distinction that we all know about.
And for those who do, that is a precious trust you don't want to undermine.
Sure. Right.
So it's all like change management. So, and for me, this all comes down to a quote I picked up the other day. Ironically, it's a George Orwell quote. Let me see if I can get it here. See.
I knew JT would go Orwellian on us at some point.
Well, I know that's the problem with quotes sometimes is the source. How do I get this to go away? Clearly, I don't know how to use my phone. Every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. And for all the change-minded leaders on this is probably a lesson learned, not a regret. For the change-minded people who are impatient, like I used to be, and I still kind of am, I think another way you could look at this is every administration of an alumni association or foundation or a university imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. And so I would say in all this, let's all lead with a little more humility.
Yeah.
And let's also respect that our work is built on what worked in the past. And our challenge is to adapt only those things that require to be altered in order to adapt to the way people connect, trust, and get involved in institutions. And frankly, I think if we would do that, imagine a Congress with the capacity to do that. Imagine these corporate leviathans that are driving economies that are bigger than countries, if they had that capacity to adapt like that.
Yep.
And have the pride in thinking more about transformation than disruption. Because transformation is growth-centered. Disruption has destruction in it.
So at the beginning, Matt Winston chimed in and said that JT about to drop some knowledge, and you did, and you lived up, man. That was great.
I was just going to say the same thing. I was like, there you go, Matt. There's your knowledge bomb.
Matt, you are too kind. And boy, were the insights you gave me a couple years ago spot on.
And one other user put in JT for president. And just so you know, JT, we've identified who the person was, Earl Murphy and Audra, class of 2004. And Mike Mann responded, they're going to take care of Earl and Audra to make sure they're engaged meaningfully. So,
Chris, while we're about to wrap things up, and my phone's on the other side of the room, but a great question popped up there in the chat that I thought if you could just take a quick picture of it or remember it, We'll answer it in the bonus section of the podcast about
It
digital.
starts off with how do you
experience.
differentiate between an alumni's digital experience interfacing back with the institution versus the actual people experience. We'll put this in the last section.
We'll tackle that one in the podcast.
And apologies, whomever's put it in. Great question, but we don't see your name. It says LinkedIn user for you as well. So maybe all that's Earl. So Earl,
you guys are good at the upsell on the extended play dance mix version of this. That was pretty.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
We're getting pretty good. 42 episodes in.
You have about 1,000 people watching you right now, and then like 30,000 will watch the recorded version because of you. So just so you know,
I'm an only child. I'm an only child in a small family. So who knew I had that many loved ones?
Well, before we head over to record the bonus segment, Chris, who are we featuring in 2 weeks?
The next one's going to be fun because he's a brilliant guy, but sort of opposite. It was Earl Murphy the whole time. So Earl wants you to be president too. This is a brilliant guy who's relatively new to the alumni engagement field. He comes with a whole different background, and he brings some really cool thinking to this at Loyola University Chicago. A guy named Lawrence Balatin. JT, I think you might have met him, right? He was kind of starting when you were leaving the role, and Lawrence is just a really thoughtful guy. I sat down with him at the Case Summit this year, and he told me 3 or 4 things they were doing, and I said, Lawrence, you got to come on our show and tell that story. So I'll have lots of ideas and fodder for questions for him.
And everybody on LinkedIn can see each other when they're talking to each other, but we're in an interface called StreamYard, and so for some reason there's a disconnect between being able to see who everybody is. Not sure why. I think it's people's individual settings. But
your presidential lobbyist was Jennifer Cunningham, by the way, JT. Just so
you know. You can crunch all the polling data, and I might get elected.
There you go.
There we go.
So I have one quick question before we sign off here. So when I agreed to do this, is the extended part where I get to meet Jason, Sean, and Will?
Yeah, they're coming on in the after show. Right, exactly.
Oh wait, this is Alumness.
Alumless. We're not Smartless.
It's not Smartless. Why am I doing here?
We're trying to keep it quiet so they don't copyright infringe us on our name.
Yeah. Where's all my Biore swag?
We should get some swag and some cool music like they have, and
we do need a theme song. My 21-year-old son said we need a theme song to go with our logo.
I agree.
So I've been using a theme song to introduce the podcast, but we don't have one for the live version. I think we ought to work on that one.
Let's have a contest for one of our listeners to record a theme song, and we'll use the best one.
Yeah, that'd be good.
JT, thank you. It was fantastic.
Thank you, JT. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. 30 minutes goes by really fast, so pick up the podcast version to hear the extended conversation with JT and all of our other guests. And thanks to Max Leiston and the team at Protopia for being our sponsoring partner. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.